Hi, and welcome everybody. A number of you have been with us for several years, and you may remember Frank was with us before, Frank Hickey, and of course, Magee Hickey, who was here just last week. Brother and sister. And I'm going to have Magee introduce Frank and what he's going to talk about. I just want to mention briefly that I visited what was then called the Ukraine in what was then called Kiev. I can't remember when, but maybe 20 years ago. And they were very mocking about the Russians. So life has changed. This is something I got at one of their flea markets. So I'm wearing in honor of Frank and Ukraine. As usual, we have a note in group chat. If you'd like to ask a comment or question, I think most of you know already, please write just to me anytime. So we're delighted to have double Hickeys today. That's what we used to, okay. And Magee, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce Brother Frank. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Judy. It gives me great pleasure to interview my brother. I don't know how many of you were on a Zoom that we did before with my brother. My brother is one of the most amazing, generous people I have ever met in my life. So I take great pride calling him my brother. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. We had great parents who always thought about helping other people. But my brother Frank has taken it to a whole new level. The war breaks out in Ukraine. What is it now? 3 years next month, I think, Frank?
That's right. 3 years next month.
My brother's always been an adventurer and has led the most interesting life of probably anyone I know. He speaks many languages. He's lived all around the world. When the pandemic broke out, he was in Goa. I didn't even know where Goa was, but right? You were in Goa?
I was in Goa.
Goa. So I had to turn to my husband and say, where is Goa? But anyway, when the war breaks out, when Russia invades Ukraine, my brother sees this as a moment to go help people because that's who my brother is. And without really having any contact with anybody, he goes to Poland, to the town on the border where people are crossing into Poland from Ukraine. And he just decides, oh, I'm going to help people. I'm going to pick up the luggage. And, my brother is no spring chicken. It's a milestone birthday coming up for me, and he's my older brother. So I'm turning 70 in June, and we share the same birthday. Talk about coincidences. I'm not as adventurous as him, but we have many similarities. Both of us have been in journalism. We're both writers. He is far more adventurous, far more generous. But so the war breaks out. He just flies to Poland, doesn't know what he's going to do there. He just is going to help. And he does. He helps. He's there for 3 months on a visa. Frank can correct my facts. But then he meets a lot of interesting people who are heading to Israel from Ukraine. So he thinks, well, I haven't been to Israel. Maybe I can go help them in Israel. So I have a friend who is very involved in Israel, and he actually worked for an agency that I knew, UJA. And they loved him there helping out. And he was there for 3 months for his 3-month visa. Then that expires. He comes back to New York. And I don't know his mindset, but I think he was saying, I really want to get inside of Ukraine. So he flies to Moldova. I don't even know where Moldova is on the map. And he finds a way to get into Ukraine. Meanwhile, he's got 3 sisters in the metropolitan area worried to death. You don't fly into a war zone, except if your name is Frank Hickey, and without a contact. He just wants to help people. So Frank, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've done this in Ukraine 3 rounds now. Is that correct?
It's starting to blur, Magee, but yes, I think it is 3 rounds.
And the last round, so then an agency that he started working for in Odessa, they liked him so much, they sent an email to his sisters, because he's always giving our contact information, saying, we have now worked out that he can have a year-long visa. We always liked the idea of a 3-month visa so he could come back and we could see that he's alive. but they gave him a year-long visa. Luckily, he only stayed for 5 months. I think it was 5, and he came back in December. And so we are thrilled that he's back. We're thrilled that he can talk to the Center for Learning and Living. And Frank, I brag about you all the time because I've just never known such a generous person who just wants to go help people. So tell us what it has been like for you in Ukraine.
It was a wild ride. I had a lot of adjusting to do. I knew nobody over there, as you know. I went over there because I'd learned that sending out emails and resumes to organizations here was a waste of time. Perhaps having the Irish name of Hickey and being retired from the Los Angeles Police Department might have charity and volunteer organizations wondering, what's up with this guy? He doesn't fit the mold. What's he going to do if we sponsor him? So, as I did as a journalist and as a detective, I decided, Goya card, get off your bottom and knock on doors. So I went to Odessa and knocked on doors. And within 3 days, I was stringing camouflage rags to make camouflage netting for the Army and doing a variety of other things. That morphed into month after month of doing that in hot weather. I wish to report Odessa is just as hot as New York in the summertime. And then teaching women's jujitsu, English, French, Spanish, Mandarin, and ballroom dancing to keep everything on a good level, and working in a soup kitchen, feeding the homeless refugees in Odessa. And that went on and on. This was during bombing raids, of course. The bombing raids would be sounding 6 or 7 times a day on the average. And it was very tough getting adjusted to that because a sensible person would scurry down to the bomb shelters, which I did, and wait for the all clear. Sometimes those raids would last for 6 or 7 hours. I would wake up in the morning in the shelter. Some of the shelters had no windows, of course, for safety reasons, not knowing what had happened above ground. It's great to be back in New York. It's great not to be having to adjust to electricity blackouts, cold weather without any heat, and of course the bombing raids, sometimes at the most inopportune times, when I'm at market, when I'm sleeping, when I'm teaching a class. We hear the boom, boom, the very loud sounds of drones being stopped, hopefully, by the Ukrainian air defenses.
My next question is, what are the Ukrainian people like as they're living their lives? You know, it wasn't just like a month-long invasion. We're coming up on 3 years now. You have mostly been in Odessa, correct?
Correct.
And how would you define how they're living their lives and what are they like and what draws you to go help them?
Certain conservative voices in this country say that Ukraine's cities are destroyed. I'm standing on a street corner in Odessa where they have the traffic signals giving you how many seconds before you can safely cross. Some of the traffic signals say 88 seconds, which for a New Yorker is ridiculous because we are jaywalkers here. 88 seconds of thick car and motorcycle traffic. I'm looking around at this, I'm saying, this city is not destroyed. The traffic is heavy there, sometimes as heavy as Manhattan. The buses, I wish to say, run better than the Manhattan ones. You can depend on them coming more often. And I will go to a public square where there are 4,000 or 5,000 people drinking, dancing, playing Ukrainian music, and carousing as people do all around the world. The idea that the cities are destroyed just doesn't hold up. It's not true. It's easy to say, well, we should abandon Ukraine because the cities are all destroyed. I'm here to tell you, they're not destroyed. Pizza bike messengers are running near me all the time on the sidewalk. Cars can park on the sidewalk, and believe me, they do. Motorcycles obey no laws whatsoever. It's a long way from being destroyed.
What do you see? I mean, we have so much to talk about, but what do you see as the future of Ukraine? What is going to happen with the change in president in our country?
I'm not Nostradamus, but when I last had the courage to check our American figures, the Pew organization in July of 2024 said that 11% of America has a very favorable or somewhat favorable view of Putin. I believe that our aid will be cut off with the new administration, and I believe that Ukraine will be left to its own devices, along with European help, whatever that'll be. It is not a good situation. Need I say more?
Yeah, the Ukrainian soldiers and military have really been incredible. You know, defeating and holding their own against such a big invasion. Talk a little about the Ukrainian spirit, if you would. What do you
Ukrainians,
like about the Ukrainian spirit?
in 3 words, Ukrainians are tough. You can be standing on the street with howling winds, sleet, wind whipping snow into your face, and they will stand there unmoved. They take pride in their toughness. They take pride in their ability to get through anything. If you know anything about Ukrainian history, they've had to get through anything. In the 1930s, before World War II, Stalin used a policy of Holodomor, which translates as forced starvation, and 4 million of them died of starvation. Odessa was occupied by the Russians during the war, by the Nazis during the war, and then fought over throughout the war. Some of the buildings still show the bombing scars from World War II. They are tough. They are not going to voluntarily surrender. And if I can lurch into politics, that's why it's not Ukraine's fight. It's also America's fight. It's the free world's fight. I can't put it any simpler than that.
Why do you think there are some in the conservative world that think that we should not help Ukraine?
One bugaboo is, well, they are corrupt. The government is corrupt. We hear that all the time. I heard that in Odessa all the time, that the Ukrainian government is corrupt. However, certain Latin American countries, such as Mexico, also have a reputation for corruption. And if Russia invaded them, we wouldn't sit by. If Russia invaded Mexico, we wouldn't say, oh, they're corrupt. We're not going to help them. We would rally to their defense. I think the Atlantic Ocean has a big deterrent effect in our taking this seriously. Isolationism has always been a facet of American history. We didn't get into World War I until 3 years after it began. We didn't get into World War II until 2.5 years after it began. And I believe there's a strong isolationist feeling in this country that we should not go against Putin. We should not go against the Russians. And that's all I can attribute this to. My first trip back to New York, I was shocked to find Russian American citizens, medical professionals, college graduates supporting Putin's invasion of Ukraine. At which point I tried to get back to the basics and said, killing children in hospital beds is wrong. And I was met with counter arguments that Ukraine was corrupt. I don't think the children in the hospital beds were corrupt. And a lot of the world is corrupt. To me, that seems to be a very flimsy argument for allowing genocide.
Right. And I know you had said you wanted to talk about this as much as possible in America to try to persuade people to see it differently. How's that going?
I'm doing my best. I'm staying up late. I essayed into the world of stand-up comedy at the comic strip after I'd been back only about a week, and gave serious humorous talks, I hope, about the Ukrainian war and the fact that I'd been there in a way to approach it from another level, and been writing and, for want of a better word, buttonholing people about it. Anybody who doesn't know that I've been to Ukraine must be in a coma, because unfortunately, I'm wearing my flag on my sleeve and talking to people about it. That includes at the Harvard Club, where the large man checking coats asked me bluntly in a Slavic accent, "What are you doing with a Polish army coat?" It's the only coat I had. And I thought we were going to have a political debate in the Harvard Club at the coat check room. I'm not a Harvard graduate. My prep school just had their reunion there. And I told him, and he said, "Oh, good. I am Polish army soldier." I said, "Whew, we dodged that bullet." I could just see us, I could just see us rolling around on the floor of the Harvard Club with him holding my coat, and people saying, "What's going on? Is Hickey having a political debate?" Because I'm not political. I don't understand politics. I never got that interested in it. To me, this is not political. This is human rights.
Right. I found it so interesting, your stand-up comedy. Just tell us a little bit about what you said at the very beginning, quoting the president of Ukraine.
Zelensky said, "Some people might wonder why we are joking about the war, but humor gets us to survive. Humor allows us to survive, and we must all survive this."
Right. And what is your feeling about Zelensky?
I haven't been following him in a way to reduce, how shall I say, mania about the war. He is not popular with a lot of people I know in Odessa. They tell me, surprise, surprise, he's corrupt. However, he's the only game in town, and that is the important thing about him. I don't see any other leaders coming up to his area of influence or expertise. So I think he's what we have. He's what we will deal with.
Right. And you actually don't know if he's corrupt. And what do we define as corrupt? I mean, I see someone who's pretty courageous out there. Don't you think he's courageous?
I do think he's courageous, and you're correct. Corruption is often in the eye of the beholder or the throat of the shouter. When these people were talking to me about corruption, which is essentially the same word in Russian, so no need for me to learn a new word for that, I was reminded that as a detective, I had handled a lot of corruption cases here in New York and had a better understanding of what it really is than many people who just dismiss the government. "Oh, they're corrupt. They're corrupt." I had to stand in line for 4 hours at the government office. I had to go to 3 different offices when they told me I'd only have to go to one. Petty annoyances, which can be labeled, well, this is democracy. This is bureaucracy. This is not necessarily corruption. We have a lot of amateurs shouting about corruption, but as I said, I was a paid professional to do it. That includes corrupt charities, corrupt police charities, and corrupt policemen, and corrupt politicians and lawyers, et cetera, et cetera.
So I should add about my brother, if you don't understand this already, he never takes money from anybody. I mean, who in the world flies at their own expense to Ukraine or Poland or Israel and then volunteers and barely, I don't know if anyone ever gave you a stipend for room and board. Chances are not. My
No,
brother lives very humbly. He was, what, you got no money ever, right? For your humanitarian
no,
work?
no. The last time I got paid a penny of salary was
So,
when I was a detective in New Mexico 3 years ago. That was it.
and it's so great that you like to live humbly, because he does live humbly. When he came back from Odessa after one round, he said he got a really good deal on a hotel room. It was on the 10th floor, and other people didn't want to live on the 10th floor. So he got a good rate. And his sisters, his sisters and I were also upset because, the reason that it's cheap on the 10th floor is no one wants to be in the rubble from the 10th floor of the hotel. And there Frank was getting a good deal on a hotel room. I think, Frank, we should show some of the videos and also some of the still pictures, because what Frank would bring, just from my long distance view of what he was doing there, was a sense of joy. What exactly was Frank doing there every day for 5 months, most recently? He was, well, Frank, you should tell them, but he was teaching, he was dancing, he was singing, he was telling stories, he was working on other people's English. But you tell us, what was a typical day like? And Julia, who's on the tech side of this Zoom, could maybe just throw in some pictures of Frank being Frank Hickey in Odessa.
The typical day began with my getting up, usually in the dark, to teach. I would be teaching, as I said, different topics. And also, while I was teaching languages, my boss came up with the great idea, well, Frank knows an awful lot about books. Let's start a book club. So we started a book club, which opened in the mornings, and I would get to breakfast in a cafeteria kind of place because there were very few menus in English. And I would have my cafeteria breakfast, which I got to like very much because it was open early. And then I would usually walk to my class and teach either language or books that day. Sometimes I would have 4 or 5 classes a day, usually in person. Only a couple of them were online, at which point we would finish up. A lot of times I took it as a note that the classes were going well because my students wanted to speak with me on the cold streets outside in the howling wind and go over some points that we had gone over in class. I wanted to deviate from the usual books that they might have been learning. I had them read the entire book by Raymond Chandler of The Long Goodbye, and I introduced them to the books of Patrick Dennis, who wrote Auntie Mame, and they were fascinated by Auntie Mame. She was the quintessential 1950s capitalist woman living her own life in Manhattan. They devoured Auntie Mame. They devoured Around the World with Auntie Mame, the follow-up. They were surprised that they'd never heard about her and that this book had gone out for thousands of volumes. It was selling 1,000 books a day when it first was published, and was responsible for 2 movies, 1 Broadway show, which keeps reopening all the time, and standard songs. They also enjoyed The Joyous Season, also written by Patrick Dennis, and were amazed at the range of information that was available to them in books. Which surprised me, they all knew about Catcher in the Rye, which I thought would be a nice Christmas book to study. They all knew about that. They said it was depressing. So instead, we went with Patrick Dennis's The Joyous Season. If they didn't like a book, I told them, we're going to make this as happy as we can in a democracy, and we will vote down a book. We also studied and read the entire Huckleberry Finn, which has implications today about slavery versus non-slavery, individual conscience versus what the church and the state tell you, and any books that I thought would be interesting to them. As I said, they were incredibly prolific readers, some of them. They were very familiar with books that were critical of the American society, or writers who were critical of the American society, such as Mark Twain or Jack London. London, if I recall correctly, was an avowed socialist. And when I was in Odessa, there was a change of names of Russian streets and Russian parks to other countries. Maxim Gorky Park became known as Mark Twain Park. That's official. And only the traditional people will refer to it as Maxim Gorky Park because Gorky was a Russian, and Mark Twain, of course, was an American who happened to visit Odessa in 1867 and left his mark on it by writing about it and the famous Potemkin Steps. Do we have any other questions about that?
Well, I'm very interested. How is your Ukrainian and how is their English? You're teaching this in Ukrainian or English?
I was teaching it in English, especially in my classes that were English. I tried to enforce the rule that we would only speak in English. I was learning Russian and not Ukrainian because, as you may know, as I spoke before, I tried initially to get into the Ukrainian Foreign Defense Legion. They had one word for me, which was dedushka, grandpappy. You're too old. I tried in California. I tried here in New York near the United Nations. I went to the military attaché at the United Nations here and wore out my welcome. And I was unable to join the army. So I decided I would, instead of looking for a job, I would create a job. And to that end, I wanted to speak Russian better than I did already, because my dream job would have been to persuade Russian soldiers to put down their weapons, to stop fighting, to do something else, to realize they were in a war that they would never be proud of, to realize this was not honorable. I didn't need to learn Ukrainian for that purpose. I did need to learn better Russian. And some of my students complimented me. They said, Frankushka, which translates as Frankie, your Russian is getting much, much better. I didn't have the courage to ask them much better than what. Maybe much better than when I first got there. But I was practicing my Russian all the time. The classes were always conducted in English, except for my more troublesome students. After 4 or 5 hours of teaching in a day, sometimes longer, I understood finally, why do teachers drink?
And we should stress you don't drink at all, but you understand the need.
Not yet. Not yet. Not yet.
Did you ever have a chance to have discussions with Russian soldiers about putting down their weapons?
No. I got to Kherson, spelled Kherson, Kheron. That was as close as I got to the front lines. And a lot of Kherson had been destroyed earlier in the beginning part of the war. The soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers, left Kherson for some unknown reason as soon as the invasion happened, and very few policemen stayed. So the people tried with antiquated weapons, hunting rifles, etc., to resist the Russians. They were quickly slaughtered, those people. And then they greeted the Russians unwillingly, of course, holding nothing but Ukrainian flags and hoping to avoid bloodshed. It didn't work, but I was never at the front lines of the battle.
Your sisters and I are very happy about that. I really didn't want you to be having a discussion with a Russian soldier who had a weapon to tell him to put down the weapon. I saw, as I told you, Frank, but I want to tell everyone, I saw this documentary about the first month of the invasion of Ukraine, and I'm always mispronouncing it. Bucha or Bucha? Bucha?
I believe it's Bucha, but don't hold me to it.
Bucha. I'm waiting for it to come out. I saw it at the JCC a screening of it at the Jewish Community Center on the Upper West Side, and it was so graphic, so violent, so bloody. And I go up at the end and I tell the documentary maker, oh, my brother's in Odessa. And he immediately says, get him out of there. What's he doing there? I said, he's helping people. And they said, oh, we so admire that, but I'm so worried for him. It was such a devastating documentary. When it comes out, it is amazing. And it's definitely worth seeing because it's about one heroic man who was able to cross over all the checkpoints and save about 200 people who were just indiscriminately being shot by the Russian soldiers. Just a woman standing outside gardening, just shot dead. So, you know, it was not something I should see when I'm worried about my brother. But you were in a totally safer place, right? It wasn't until you came back to New York most recently that you said, what percentage of people have died in Odessa from during the war?
I was quoting statistics. It wasn't very high, but because of the seaport there, we were getting bombed all the time. They blew out, a bomb blew out the windows of my ballroom dancing place when I was not there. And I saw on the same area a lot of destroyed buildings that had been destroyed the past week recently. This was in July of 2023 when the Black Sea Grain Initiative fell through and the Russians were blockading the Black Sea to prevent food from going to Africa and Asia from Ukraine. Ukraine exports something like 20% of the world's wheat and other large numbers of grain and corn, and that's why it's known as Europe's breadbasket. That is why everybody wanted to get it, including Hitler, including Putin, because they realize how important it is. And it goes out through the Black Sea. For example, I found out the hard way that bananas there are 4 times as expensive as they are in Manhattan. And I like bananas. And I was surprised by that until I found out that they come via the Black Sea, which the Russians are blockading all the way from Ecuador, which does something like 80% of the world's bananas. They have to come through the Black Sea to Odessa, and consequently the prices are higher.
And this is probably a naive question, but maybe you just lay it out for us. Why does Russia want Ukraine so much? I mean, it's only been hundreds of years that they've been fighting, right? But what is it that they want? Is it because of the grain, because they're Europe's breadbasket, or what is it?
I think it's because of the grain and also the fact that they've only had their freedom since 1991 when the Russian collapsed. And that many Russians believe it is still part of Russia.
Right. Oh, I know. You can talk to Russians in Brooklyn and, you know, you don't understand the war. That's what people tell you all the time in America. You don't understand. That's our country. And they, you know, we deserve to have that back. Do you engage with Russians when you're back in New York and talk about it, or just let them go?
I try not to. Wearing the flag on my sleeve or a flag decal, I will very often run into street people who you know are not Europeans, you know do not speak Slavic languages, and they will say, Slava Ukraina, which is, you know, glory to Ukraine. So that seems to be a universal saying, even among street people in New York City. I don't engage with people in politics, in political discussions, because looking back on a long, colorful life, I try to count up the number of people I've converted by political talk. And it's not a large number. I don't think people usually do change through discourse. Maybe by going to a library and reading, but not face-to-face conversations. I just don't see it happening that much.
Right. And when you came back the last time, early December, um, your sisters and I, our first question was, are you going back? Please don't go back is really what we're pleading. Uh, so what are your thoughts about going back to Ukraine?
At this point, depending on what happens after the American inauguration in 9 days or so, the borders could be shut down and I would not be able to leave. And so also would not other people be able to leave. And that to me is chilling when you're one person in a country that is occupied by Russia, which it could be in a matter of days. That's not a good feeling. The Americans, or rather everybody that I knew who was in the Foreign Defense Legion, has said they can never go to Russia. They will be executed. And if Russia comes to Ukraine, the same thing would happen. And I don't think Russians would believe that a former detective came to Ukraine out of the goodness of his heart to help people out and had no ulterior motives. Minds just don't, government minds just don't work that way. So I'm not planning to go back at this time. Also, there seems to be a raft of doctors who want me to stay in America to run some more tests, which so far have been healthy and beneficial. But there's always another test at
Right.
our age. Always
And
another test.
you never toot your own horn, but you're already hooked into lots of volunteer possibilities in New York City. What are you doing these days?
I've been working with a couple of volunteer organizations, mostly doing translations in between doctor's appointments, hearing the morning litany, doctor's office, please hold, doctor's office, please hold. I'm trying to stay as active as I can in that. We have a lot of problems in this country stemming from immigration perceived problems, crime perceived problems, which are phantoms, because our crime rate is low. Murder rate in New York as of last year was the lowest it's been since 1941. And we have a lot of issues here in this country that are going to take center stage for me anyway.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. On behalf of the sisters who worry about you all the time, we're glad you're going to stay here and do your humanitarian work right in the 5 boroughs. I'd like to turn it over for questions now. And I don't even know if they've been throwing up the pictures of you in the Ukraine, but you know, ballroom dancing, singing, having a good time with people, you know, it's an important part when you're in a war, to have people feel good about their lives. So there is my brother dancing in Odessa. But let's see, Judy, do people
Yeah,
have
I've got,
some questions?
Hey, everybody. Hi, Magee. Hi, Frank.
Hello.
Good to see you guys. My question is, Frank, how did you manage to learn all those languages?
I will defer that question to my sister Magee, going back to when she was just gone 16 years old and what she was doing in Europe.
Oh, well, that's very nice. It's not really about me. My brother just has an amazing facility with languages. He was off in Europe. I was 16 years old, and I said to my parents, I really wanted to go to this music school south of Paris, Fontainebleau, the most famous music school in Europe, with Nadia Boulanger, the most famous music teacher of the 20th century. And my parents said, oh, yes, we'll send you. Part of the reason is they wanted to figure out where Frank was, because he was 18 at the time and he was traveling the world, and they used me as bait to figure it out. But he was, Frank, when did you first start to show? I would brag, I would say Frank is fluent in French, Spanish, Italian, Serbo-Croatian. I don't know, how's your Hebrew now? It's pretty good.
No. The Hebrew
just
non
keep saying shalom, shalom.
He's fluent in
Totally.
Mandarin and Cantonese, as far as I'm concerned. You're fluent, you know, and it really surprises Chinese Americans to hear this round eye white guy from Brooklyn speaking Mandarin and Cantonese. How's your Japanese? It's just coming along, right?
So, Japanese, I learned most of my languages either because I was living in that country or because they were large criminal entities there. The Japanese criminals in America are not a large group, so it hasn't come to that yet. Magee was dispatched to Europe to bring me back. I still remember a letter she wrote to me that saying that she was going to get sent over to pull me by my collar back to America, and that the parents had been worried because she'd been drinking wine at a high school party, and she said, by the way, over there in France, how is the wine? So I knew she wasn't going to be dead serious about pulling me back. She wanted to experience France the same way I did. And I lived homeless for 2 years in Europe. When you came over, I think I was living inside an ambulance that wasn't being used somewhere in Paris, and lived everywhere from Morocco to Turkey, aside from the Iron Curtain. I was indoors for about 6 weeks of that total time. All the rest of the time I was outdoor. Ask me anything you want to about European weather. When Putin invaded Ukraine, I really didn't want to go back to Europe. If you asked me about Europe, I would tell you Europe is cold because it was.
I
want
just
to make it. I didn't want to make
remember,
a joke about it, but I wished that Putin had invaded Bermuda,
right.
which would have been much more to my liking.
I just remember my brother sleeping under the piano in the pavilion outside of Fontainebleau, outside of this music school. And you know, you're just an amazing human being. You just want adventure. And last week, for those of you who were on the Zoom when I was interviewing John Miller, and I said my brother's just back from Ukraine, and John and Frank know each other well. They go back 40 years at least. He said, "Oh, your brother and I." Oh, and I was asking John, why did he change jobs so many times? And he said, "Oh, your brother and I share the same spirit. It's the adventure. It's how you can do it. What is next?" And Frank is very much like that. You know, what's the next adventure going to be like? How can I help people in this next adventure? So when I say my brother's in Ukraine, you know, people go, you know, how could he risk that? Well, he likes adventure. I don't know if you like danger, but you like,
Well,
right.
no.
You're less of a risk taker in some ways than I am, but I do like to sleep in the same bed at night. And my brother doesn't mind more humble places to live, I think. But you know, I haven't even said all the languages you speak. What did I leave out?
I'm not fluent in Serbo-Croat. I think I've spent more time speaking Serbo-Croatian to people in America than I actually did in that country. In descending order, French, Spanish, Sicilian, German, Mandarin, Cantonese, Russian, and Arabic. I think that's descending order. But a
Wow.
lot of it has to do with practice, especially at our age. And the brain cells keep going. And if you don't practice it, you lose it. I'm currently teaching English to Chinese and Korean speakers here in New York City. And I'm reaching back a long way to get some of the words because I didn't have much chance to practice in Odessa.
Mhm.
Yeah, do you know any Korean? I didn't know you knew Korean.
Yes, I spent 3 months in Korea and learned some of it enough to have basic one-way, mostly conversations. It's supposed to be the toughest language in the world.
Indeed. I think, Frank, one of the most chilling phrases I've ever heard is when we're afraid they were bombing the ballroom class. The picture of that is incredible to me, sort of personifies your attitude. Knowing Magee and her involvement always in helping other people and yours, what in your family do you think? I guess I have two questions. One is, would you discourage other people from volunteering who are not capable or who can cause maybe more disruption than they do good uh, out of their desire, maybe for a feeling of self-gratification? I think not all volunteers are as helpful as you are. And also, what do you think in your family has created this incredible commitment to service to others?
Magee, do you want to jump on that or do you want
No,
me
I
to?
want to hear your
Oh, I
answer.
want to hear what you say.
Our father volunteered all the time. Our father worked very hard at his work and also gave unstintingly to different charity organizations his time, his efforts, his considerable human relation skills. He could talk to anybody. He could talk to the garage guy working on his car. He could talk and did talk to politicians cheerfully. He was able to go on different levels of society. He once told Jimmy Hoffa to behave like a gentleman or my father would throw him out of a union meeting. He was able to, oh yeah.
Oh,
Our
and you
mother
should
said,
put
"Oh,
that
what?"
in context that our mother felt that Jimmy Hoffa was going to come after our father. I guess he was at a city hall meeting with our father in the mid 60s, maybe, and he was using 4-letter words. And my father corrected him and said, you know, we're all gentlemen here. We don't need to hear a conversation like that. And my mother, to her dying day, because we never knew really what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, she was always worried that Jimmy Hoffa was going to come after the family. But go on.
I remember the quote, "Oh, Larry," to our father, "we'll wind up in the river." And my father said, "You can't let these guys know you're afraid of them." I don't think my father was afraid of them, but at different gangster funerals, Hoffa would come up and give my dad a big bear hug, and Hoffa was 5'3". Our father was 5'9", and say, "Everyone's afraid of me except this guy. Larry's not afraid of me." They left that part out of me. There's a lot of people I'm afraid of. Our father, as I said, volunteered to the point where he was able to find a building that was slated for destruction. He schmoozed, handled, negotiated, wheedled, and cajoled the city to the point where it became known as the Larry Hickey Center for Development on Dyer Avenue in the Bronx, where, correct me if I'm wrong, Magee, they help children who are born with disabilities, such as being born with mental difficulties or to drug-addicted parents. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Our mother would always say, "Oh, your father, he's out all day. He gets up at 7 a.m. He goes to St. Patrick's Cathedral and he's on the altar with the cardinal, and then he goes to meeting after meeting. I never see him." I said, "And you're complaining about this? This is when he was in his 70s and 80s that he just came to life more. He had more time to volunteer because he had raised his 4 children, paid all those enormous bills for raising children, and he had time to do all the volunteer work he wanted to do. So he was head of the board of 2 different, the Kennedy Child Study Center and Astor Services for Children. He was always at meetings helping people. And he was president of the parish council at St. Vincent Ferrer for 25 years. He was head of the Neighborhood Coalition for Shelter. And my mother would say, "Oh, he just likes to go to meetings after meetings after meetings." And I'd say, but yes, he's helping people. He's not sitting in a bar drinking. He's not off playing golf somewhere. He's not in Florida like most people his age. And my mother, we should give credit to her. She also was a very generous person. It just took her a long time to get to religion class, but she was always volunteering, helping at her local church. She sang in the choir and she taught release time CCD classes at St. Ignatius. And she was a very generous force on the Upper East Side, too. My father just was such a people person. And Frank is the same way. And I think I got that, too. He just loved to be out there on the street helping people. When there was a snowstorm, he lived in a brownstone on 66th Street. He'd be out there shoveling other people's sidewalks as well as his own, and he was in his 70s. No, you're not supposed to be doing that. You could let a younger person do that, but that was just who he was. And Frank inherited that gene, and it was so wonderful in the last years of my father's life. He lived 4 years after our mother, and Frank came in. You resigned or retired from the LAPD basically to be with your father for the last 4 years of his life, lived in his apartment with him, slept on the floor because that's Frank or whatever, and just took such great care of him. It's just who my brother is. And I'm always proud of him for that.
Yeah, I wanted to, I remember asking you how you had the courage, and you said it wasn't courage, but certainly very few other people would have that much chutzpah, to use another language you partially know. Frank, when we went to Ukraine, and it was roughly 20 years ago, I'm lousy on numbers. One of the things that really struck me was how friendly the Ukrainians were and their social life. There was a lot of sitting around at cafes, schmoozing, being friendly, maybe with the people at the next table, not just their own unit. Uh, I also remember the women, when they were young, just looked fantastic. Uh, Beautiful, sexy when they were older. They put on a lot of weight. They were dumpy. They wore babushkas. So, I mean, those were two of the things that really struck me. And I'm just curious if you saw the same thing or whether it was different when you went.
I saw the strain that being victims of a genocidal war puts on people. I saw that more often than not. I know about the happiness, I saw the happiness, but at the same time, it was balanced by the reality that we have done nothing wrong except get born on this side of the Russian border, and they are trying to kill us every day. There's no other way to put that. And studies have shown that Ukraine now suffers the world's highest rates of mental illness and depression, which is not surprising because they are being slaughtered. Civilians are being slaughtered. I know people here in New York City. I will ask them, how are things going? They will tell me, my parents were both killed last month. And this is very hard to deal with for anybody. And these are not older people, these are younger people to whom parents are very important at this time. So the joyous, carefree times of 20 years ago have been eclipsed by this horrible war.
Could you talk a little more also? It's really so sad, really tragic, about, and I'm following up on what Magee has asked you, how conservatives have reacted to Ukraine. Trump has always, in my memory, been hostile to Ukraine. And a number of people have connected that to what they see as his desire to please Putin. And so would love to hear your thoughts, your speculation, if it were, as to what is that really about and why so hostile to the idea, not only of supporting Ukraine, but having Ukraine join NATO and so on. There's so much more that could be done to help them. And Biden, of course, has been quite different, even as he's moving out the door.
I think we would need a team of dedicated psychiatrists to understand Mr. Trump. I'm not qualified for that. I remind us back in history, we had thousands, millions of Americans who were pro-Hitler, who were pro-Italy. There was a huge isolationist movement. The recent rally at Madison Square Garden evoked some historical parallels with the 1939 German-American Bund having their rally there, where 20,000 people attended. At the time of World War II, I was surprised to see that New York City alone had 600,000 German Americans, some of which had suspect loyalties towards the new Germany. So we've always had this in this country. We've always had groups that become frightened by modern innovations, by new ideas, and fascism can become very attractive to many people. Every country has a fascist party. I was surprised to find that Monaco has a fascist party. So does San Remo. No country is immune from this kind of thinking. You can't put up a boundary against this. So it flows literally around the world. People get frightened. They look for a strong man. As I mentioned, 11% of America now favors Putin. But even in Asia, 46% of the Philippines approve of Putin. And Filipinos were American citizens up until 1946. Malaysia and Bangladesh both hold Putin in high approval ratings, higher than 50%. Why? Once again, that goes to our friends in the psychiatric field. But authoritarianism, fascism, unfortunately, will never go out of style.
It's discouraging. Okay.
I'm trying to keep everything happy. Magee, you notice I'm wearing your Christmas present today. It's
Oh.
getting broadcast history, right? I
Good.
don't know if you can see it.
No, I
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
realize it. I'm glad.
You told me the humble boutique from which you purchased it. You can say the name on the air, but it's a
Okay.
very good, lot less, right?
You
Our
like
friends, I love
lot
it.
less.
I love it.
My brother does not want to ever spend any money on clothing, so his sisters feel it's our job to give him as much clothing as possible.
Kind of a good thing.
So I'm so glad, and I'm so glad you've retired the T-shirt. I think you've retired it, that has the globe on it.
That's waiting in the spring drawer.
Oh.
When it gets warmer, I'll wear it. I may wear it in some places like the Yale Club, the Harvard Club, certain places in Southampton, New York, so just to make a fashion splash.
Right,
It's
just to be contrary, which my brother always has in that
right.
privileged world that you were raised in, but not interested in being a part of. And,
No.
you know, very proud of you for being just who you are, because that's a good thing. You're just a very helping person. Tell us a little bit about your book and how much writing you did. Yeah, I mean, your whole life, you've always been scribbling and writing and drawing. And, you know, but when you were in Odessa all those many months, how much writing did you do every day? And how much did you send out to the world of your writing?
As you say, I wrote every day. I wasn't sure if it was going to be published posthumously, not to be overly dramatic, but I was a serving policeman for a long time, and policemen in America die on duty. One dies every 3 days. So when you're writing, you realize you may not have a chance to rewrite this, to put it bluntly. And I carried the same ethos over to writing when I was in Odessa. And the book doesn't go into political diatribes or historical segues. It's what I felt and lived and believed every day, my daily working with good students, with troublesome students, with some students who were pushing me for more classes than my body could handle, and the daily stresses of being in the bomb shelters. And it's a new journalism book in that it is not a documentary. As new journalism is allowed, I create certain composite characters, keep reminding people that they are composite characters, keep reminding readers that these are composite characters, and I'm giving what I saw, felt, and believed while I was there. It's very much a from the ground up kind of book. I don't go into high-flown political or ideological debates. It's day to day, the life of Frank in Odessa.
You put the
And
title.
tell us the
It's-
title. There it is.
And I
There
put
it is, that's right. Sunshine, Salo, and Sirens, or Ukraine, comma, what you gonna do? I'm very proud of that comma. I had to fight the editors for quite a while to get that comma in there. I said, it's correct English grammar. They said, yes, we already have the cover. I said, no, no, no. We need our mother's grave. Our mother would shout out from the grave, Frank, where's the comma? So we fought to put the comma in there. And I don't have a hard copy just yet. It should be available sometime this week. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to be getting a hard copy mailed to me. And
Available on, you have to sell your book.
Yes, I forgot that part. Available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and you can always contact me. I plan to have a crop of them at hand. And to me, I wanted to rush into print because, of course, the book could be historical very soon. And during the bombing raids, the writer could have been historical very soon. So I wanted to get it out there. And it is lighthearted. It's not a heavy or somber book. It details how my principal exercise during those years was dancing alone on the beach of the Black Sea, getting a lot of looks from people going by with video cameras. And some of my students were always videotaping, and they would pass on videos of me dancing. They say, yeah, that's my English teacher. That's my Mandarin teacher. That's the guy who teaches us women's jujitsu because he's afraid of what Russians will do if they come into our city. The karate schools were all closed in Odessa because the men were either in the army or in hiding from the draft. So I decided to teach my students, which were primarily female, how to defend themselves very realistically, stuff that really works. Having gone through police academies, I had to learn what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes in an alleyway, wrestling around with a 300-pound client, I will say to myself, hey, that doesn't work. Make a mental note of that if I ever get out of this alleyway and hear the beautiful sound of that second handcuff going on the client's wrist. There is no nicer sound in the world.
Tell us what the title means. Sunshine Sallow. What is sallow?
I'm sorry, it was so much a part of my life. I thought everybody knew what sallow is. Sallow is what we call in America fatback or lard. It doesn't need refrigeration, which is very important because I was living in places without refrigeration and or without electricity. It is nothing more than what's cut off the stomach of a pig and kept in your bag, in your saddlebags. It's the traditional food of Ukraine. Whenever you mention sallow to any Ukrainian, they have a guilty smile on their face because it's very bad for you physically. It is nothing but fat, unrepentant, unredeemed fat. Cossacks carried it in their saddlebags when they were fighting against the Russians, the Poles, the Turks, etc. So it's become the traditional dish of Ukraine. And once again, like Ukrainians themselves, it can withstand all kinds of conditions and still remain tough.
I love the cover. I'm seeing it for the first time this morning.
Good. You can argue with Elizabeth about it.
Why? She didn't like it? Elizabeth being the older sister, older than Frank. Why didn't she like it?
I was afraid to go into that. I was afraid she might be able to convince me because it was already cut. It was already done. And I wanted to keep my ignorant optimism about the cover, but she didn't like it that much. But I'm glad you like it.
Ukrainian dress, the cliche of Ukrainian dress, how frequent is that worn in Ukraine?
Maybe you can describe it a little bit, Frank? Mm-hmm.
It is what we could consider basically Eastern European dress, colorful shirts, embroidered smocks, once in a while baggy pants with boots. You don't see it very often in Odessa. Odessa's a big city. It's comparable to Brooklyn in that the loveliest thing about Odessa that I found was the Black Sea beach with its culture of people that go there every day, walk their dog, dance, drink coffee, alcohol, etc. And Odessa doesn't usually have many ethnic costumes extant unless they're having a celebration in the parks. Then you will see that a lot. But in everyday life, no.
And about Zelensky, he started off, as I think everybody remembers, as a comedian and wasn't taken seriously by a lot of people. He's short, not physically imposing. He, to my knowledge, hasn't been telling many jokes for quite a while, understandably. But I'd just be curious in any impressions you have, what other people there think of him. Has he changed as a person? Is this just another side that was always there? Do people admire him? And he's had to work very hard to try to be friendly and make an impression on leaders in other countries. So just be curious to hear as much as possible about your view of him and what people over there think of him.
I'm reminded of Edwin Booth, the brother of the man who killed Abraham Lincoln, on his deathbed, saying famously, "Dying is easy, comedy is difficult." And if you can do comedy, any actor will tell you you can do anything. I think Zelensky can do anything. I think he's, as I said, the most viable leader of Odessa right now. And people have mixed opinions about him. I didn't try to stir up political waters when I was teaching or talking to people about it.
Sure.
I wanted to stress to them that they can have a good life in America, that they don't need to stay in Ukraine out of reasons of national pride, especially when bombs are falling, that they should think about getting themselves and their families out. Apart from that, my classes were very apolitical. I would make jokes about New York. I said, "I'm sending you pictures from Times Square. Buy 3 T-shirts for $9.95." Right? I'm sending you pictures from New York. Pizza, 1 slice. Special, 2 slices of pizza and a soda, $7. I said, you can live even in Manhattan. It won't be the healthiest diet, but you can live. You can get a job in a restaurant as a waiter, as a dishwasher to start off with, then as a waiter. You'll have warm weather, especially in the kitchen, and you'll have food coming in all the time. You can live in America. You can live in Manhattan. You should think about that. Don't buy the propaganda that America is too expensive to live in. Go. If you can go, go. Expand your world and bring your family over away from this horrible war. Maybe depopulating the country is not a good idea. I don't think anybody left because of what I was talking to them. But who knows, in the future, they may realize that it's better to be out of the war zone than in the war zone, especially once again, things are going to change drastically, I believe, very soon.
Well, I do have to correct some of your speech, if you don't mind. It's New York.
Go right ahead.
Okay. But Rita, come on in.
Yeah. I wonder, Frank, whether you're going to be content being here and working in out of danger. I wonder whether you're tempted ever by other countries, by going to Israel, by going to what? I don't want to put thoughts in your head, Frank, but are you going to be able to think to stay in a peaceful, well, yes, less exciting, but certainly a more stable life living here and working here?
Rita, those thoughts were already there.
I know that.
You don't have to worry about putting them in my head. As I said before, I'm afraid that totalitarianism and fascism never went away and seem to be on the rise, especially now. And I will fight that in Coney Island. I will fight that in Monaco. I will fight that through writing and through acting and through serving cold soup to people who need the cold soup that day. I'm not going to stop. Where I am doesn't much matter to me. The political ideas of the people I help, they don't much matter to me either. I want to keep doing this kind of work until they put me in the box.
Well, we hope that's no time soon. Frank, if we want to donate to an organization or multiple organizations that can help, is there anything you can suggest to us?
No, really, I would bounce that question back to the experts. I'm no expert on it. I felt that I was staying shy of organizations because as I said, I created my own world over there. Sometimes the world got a little bit too heavy for me when my students wanted more and more and more lessons. I can't recommend any organization I think you can go on Charity Navigator, as we all know, and see what is real and what is fake. I would advise anybody who wants to do that, to do that.
Okay, well,
Rob,
just to follow through in a moment, are there any organizations that have been doing good work over there that you admire that you want to just mention? Give a
yes,
shout out.
I admire RASM, which is spelled RAZOM. They're in Manhattan here and also overseas. They do a lot of good work here, and they are solid. They do real work. It's a good organization with responsible people in it.
Okay, great. There's a note in chat, we'll wrap up soon, from Karen and Jim saying, we need to leave. Fabulous class. Thanks, thanks to you and the Hickey family. So I think we can all agree on that. Magee, before we wrap up, any last words from you?
My thoughts are it's just lovely for you all to give my brother this time to talk about his life's work. I mean, he just wants to help people, and I'm just very proud of him and all that he does for people. And he's going to continue. Frank, I'm surprised you didn't put in a plug for Project Russo, where you are doing some volunteer work. Do you want to
Yes.
say a little bit about Project Russo?
Good catch, Magee. I forgot about that. I shouldn't have. Project Russo is very hands-on. They are very down to the ground, down to the earth. They are helping all kinds of people from everywhere who need help. I will see the head of it, Andrew Heinrich, helping students with their algebra one-on-one, far beyond anything I could ever do, and fielding a number of projects all at the same time, helping with refugee, helping with immigrant law studies, helping with translations, helping with books, helping with food, helping with everything that we need to do. And that's what America is supposed to be about.
Right.
And I just to give a little history, I introduced Frank to Project Russo. This is why I continue to like work in small doses at Pix 11. A couple of Thanksgivings ago, I was working I guess the Saturday right after Thanksgiving, and they said, oh, go cover something at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. There's a Thanksgiving for new migrants that have just come in, and we've all been overwhelmed by the migrant entry into New York City. And I go into the Metropolitan Museum of Art where there's a Thanksgiving banquet going on, and I speak to the young man, young for me, in charge, Andrew Heinrich. And, I'm so used to when I go in with a TV camera, people have all these rules. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't mention this or that or give people their privacy. And I got to know this young man, Harvard and Harvard Law School. He just decided to found an organization to help migrants from anywhere in the world. And he does such amazing work. And when I met him, I said, oh, you've got to meet my brother. He's like the same, but he's in Ukraine. And so when Frank came back from Ukraine, he got to know Andrew. And you pop in there, 1 or 2 days a week, Frank, and just say, what do you need me to do today? And Andrew will have something for him to do. They also take donation of clothes. They're just a really great hands-on immigration nonprofit that they're out there to help people. And Frank, I hope you and Andrew work together in the foreseeable future a lot, because I love his organization and I, of course, love my brother. So
Well, please send us the information, and when we get out our Friday email, we'll put information, of course, about Frank's book and the organization you just mentioned, or organizations plural. Well, I'm filled with admiration for what you've done, Frank, and we thank you so much, Magee, for your help and support.
This organization, which is, helping migrants, how do they feel about how the American people, hating these migrants so much? Some people are so vociferous about it, they want to keep them all out. So what position does this organization take, speaking wise or anything else? I mean, they must feel terrible about it.
I think
What don't
America-
you?
America is immigrants.
Yes,
America
we
is
know that.
immigrants.
Here, we know it.
Eleanor, give him a chance. Go ahead, Frank.
America is immigrants. The Native Americans came from Mongolia originally.
Yes.
Nobody was here before them except the dinosaurs. It's ridiculous and heartbreaking to put up barriers like this. It does
It's-
nothing.
But the majority of Americans today don't seem to recognize that fact, and they hate
Yeah.
all the migrants
I
coming in.
I would take exception to the majority. I would remind us that Mr. Trump's father spoke German at home. Mr. Trump's mother spoke Scottish Gaelic at her home. Mr.
Right.
Trump's wife did certainly not speak English growing up in Slovenia. So the whole thing to me is a false flag. Yes, immigrants commit crimes. So do patriotic Americans. Take your pick, right? To me, it's a false flag, which goes back to the American Know Nothing Party called back in the 1840s and 1850s. It's not new. It's ugly. It's stupid. It's unfounded. It's illogical. And I'm running out of adjectives.
We know that here, but I disagree with you about the majority. They wouldn't have voted for Trump if they didn't feel that way, and he won, you know.
Okay, well, he's expressing his view, and yeah, unfortunately. I'm reminded of my grandfather on my mother's side was from Ukraine. So thank you for all you've done, for all you're continuing to do, and we'll follow up on suggestions on organizations that can help. Thank you again, Magee, for all you do for the school. We really appreciate it. So thank you.